This water's been sitting in the garage for many months, so it ought to be about the same temperature as the air.
Yeah, after a few months, definitely.
So you soak it down the wick.
Uh-huh. So this is a dual thermometer?
Yeah, there's two thermometers.
And this is the wet bulb, and that's the dry bulb.
Yeah, they're identical.
Oh, the one's just got a wet sock on it.
Yeah.
Ah, all right.
So in order to get a good,
Holy crap. I didn't know you were going to do that.
you got to get air moving past the wet bulb to get good evaporation. That's why they call it a sling psychrometer,
Oh, that's why they call it a sling psychrometer.
because this is kind of a sling. You know, like David and Goliath.
Uh-huh.
So that might be long enough. Now, if you look at the temperature of the wet bulb, it's 62 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
and the dry bulb is 79 and a half. 62, 79 and a half.
Got a pen right there. Oh, you're doing some calculations. Now we're getting some modern technology.
Yeah.
I assume a sling psychrometer goes back to the Aztecs.
A form of it. What did I say? 62 divided by 79.5. So we have 77, almost 78% humidity.
Humidity. Relative humidity?
Relative humidity.
Is that the same as just humidity?
No,
No.
absolute humidity. No, I don't know the difference.
Oh, okay.
I can't tell you right now.
Okay.
But that's why it's relative. It's wet bulb relative to the dry bulb,
Uh-huh.
I think. So it's 79 and 60. Now this has already gone back up to 64 because we don't have any wind on it.
Okay.
So if you put wind, you got to, because just plain evaporation is not going to do it, because the thermometer has its own heat, temperature, and the sock has its own temperature. And what we want is the temperature that water evaporates in this environment. We want the temperature where it'll be the evaporating water is there's just as much water evaporating as condensing.
Uh-huh.
And that's 61 and a half, basically. So it's actually 61 and a half by 79.
And a half.
61.5 divided by 79.5. Still 77.
Right. It seems inexact, though, because it feels like all you're doing is sort of causing wind. I mean, if there was a wind blowing on that sock at the same speed as air is getting on it as it goes around and around, will that give you the same result?
Yeah.
So it seems very inexact.
Why?
Because if there was, I mean, that was going around and around at a certain miles per hour, rotations per second or whatever,
Yeah.
to simulate a wind of, let's say, 5 miles an hour blowing on it. If there was a 10-mile-an-hour wind blowing on it, would you have to take it someplace where the wind wasn't blowing so hard? Won't you get a different reading if there's a 15, 20-minute gale force hurricane or something going on there? Miles per hour? Or is it just to generically or generally
Well, you're talking about the difference between cooling based on evaporative cooling versus advective cooling, say, the cooling that happens because you're blowing, like an air conditioner, you're blowing air across a drive fins, and that cools the fins.
The
There's no
fin,
water involved.
the fins of a what?
The air conditioner,
The air conditioner.
evaporator, and the air conditioner.
Oh yeah.
You have that heat exchange, and it's due to the air going past those fins draws off the heat because the fins will distribute will give up their heat to the air, and the faster the air goes by, the quicker it'll give up the heat
Mm-hmm.
because you're moving cold air in contact with them, and the heated air, you're moving that away, and that's
Advective.
advective cooling,
Advective.
or maybe it's convective. There's
Oh.
two kinds. There's advective. No, advective is like radiant heat, and convective is, yeah. You're getting, this is past me now.
Oh jeez.
This is back in physics.
Uh huh.
But here, what all we're worried about is the cooling that's caused by the evaporation of water. And after a certain point, you don't want it to go too fast. You want it to just be air flowing past that sock, and there's a curve to it. There's an optimal wind speed, and we're trying to get that. And
Okay.
once you go past that, it doesn't really matter anymore. The evaporative cooling isn't going to have that much more of an effect. Plus, if you know, this isn't precise, but what do you need? I mean, can you
Yeah.
tell the difference between 78 and 79% humidity?
No, I was surprised you even put the 0.5 in your calculator.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ma.
Hello, Jason.
Well, hello. How y'all doing?
Okay.
So that's basic. And this is what they used to use when weathermen used to go out and get the relative humidity.
For their TV show?
Yeah.
So we always think of like wind hitting us as cooling us off.
Wind chill.
Um,
But that's conductive. That's the air is your body is conducting the heat, and of course your sweat. The wetter you are, the colder you get.
yeah.
By the same thing, and that's evaporative cooling. And that's when it's really humid, you don't cool off from sweat.
Right.
You just sweat more, and you
Right.
stay hot.
Right.
That's why it's so uncomfortable when it's really humid. There's no difference. When it's real humid, there's no difference between that temperature and the dry bulb temperature. So we're not getting any evaporation by swinging that thing around
No. Right.
because the air is already saturated. So that thing's not going to, there's not going to be any evaporation going on, or the condensation part of it and the evaporation are going to be the same, the same amount.
Is there any cooling to the dry bulb with the wind blowing on it?
Yeah, maybe a little, but not.
But not if it's humid.
You want there to be some. You want there to be some effect. Again, the air blowing against the dry bulb is going to bring the temperature of the dry bulb, that piece of metal, down to the air temperature, because that piece of metal is probably going to be warmer. The mercury in there is probably going to naturally be warmer because you've got radiation that's heating it up. All sorts of effects are heating it up. So spinning it again puts it in close contact with the air molecules, and so you'll get a more accurate temperature of the air as opposed to the temperature of that thermometer. You know,
How long have you had this?
forever.
I mean, does it date back to the farm? Do you-
No, I had it since this is something I had from work
Oh,
But they probably had it for 50 years before he got it.
because I
Right.
used to do this. I built psychrometers for our field research, where you have the two thermocouples, and you've got a thermocouple. In one thermocouple, you have a piece of basically a wicking on it, a piece of thread wrapped around it, and that thread goes down into a water reservoir, a little medicine jar, medicine, or a film can. We used to use film cans to hold our water, and that the wick, it would wick up the, I think it was, a thick thread. So the thread was wet, constantly wet, and that would bring that moisture next to that thermocouple, and so we measured the temperature of the wet thermocouple and the dry thermocouple, and we did just this. We calculated relative humidity, and we put that whole unit down up next to a leaf out in the field, and we could measure the humidity right next to a growing leaf and compare that to the humidity of the air, the relative humidity of the air around the ambient. And that was prone. It was hard. It was hard, and it was because the wick would get dirty and it would affect the readings. And the wick, the thermocouples would break. And we were using very fine wire thermocouples, about the size of a little bit thicker than a human hair. So we didn't worry about. We didn't have any kind of fan or movement, like this spin it. We didn't spin it around. We just trusted the normal air currents around would cool that little thread, the wet thread, down without us having to do that.
Even on a day like today, where there's like literally no breeze.
Yeah, it would be. There's enough, because all you're trying to do is counteract the temperature of the sensor itself. You want to be measuring the temperature of the air and the relative humidity of the air, not the temperature of the sensor, the piece of wire.
Right.
So if the wire is small enough, it doesn't have a whole lot of thermal mass, very little thermal mass. So it's not going to have much of its own temperature component. So it's going to be virtually the temperature of the air that surrounds it, without moving any air through it or past it, any more than just the little bit of air that you have. Plus, there's always air moving. There's air moving up, even when it's perfectly calm. You've got air moving up through just the cooling currents.
Just the breathing of the planet.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so you get an accurate reading of the temperature and an accurate reading of the growth of the leaf, and then you could figure out the optimum conditions for growing these plants, or was this just all measuring stuff to measure stuff?
We're more interested in what was growing on the leaf,
Ah.
and the bacteria and the microorganisms, and what kind of environment they're in that makes them want to grow better.
because you were plant pathology. You were studying things that made plants sick, and
Yeah.
you wanted to figure out the conditions so that they would get less sick.
Keep them healthy.
Right. Wow. All right. Well,
Oh,
our Oreo pie is getting warm.
it's not the greatest.
I'm sure it'll be just
This will
fine.
come in handy.